Thank you, Sean, for recording this. All right, we're going to go and continue our discussion about the Sicilian defense. The Sicilian defense is, as you know, a counterattacking answer to e4. I'm going to go to my studies, and I'm going to get started with the Sicilian. Let's see what's in here. Nothing. Okay, good. Then this is where I will start. Chapter 1. Okay. I'm going to talk about the defense first from White's point of view, largely because a lot of you play e4 and most of you meet e5, but there are some of you who meet the center counter, which is e4 and then d5. Before we go there, I should do something very important, which is share my screen. Okay. Yes, screen share. And I'm going to share this one. Okay. I have something in the chat. Okay. All right. All of you can see this, I hope. If you can't, let me know and I'll make some adjustments. But I'm going to talk about the Sicilian, which starts e4 and c5. I'm going to talk about it from White's point of view. Largely because as you get stronger, you will meet the Sicilian defense more often than not. So after c5, White has several choices. The most common of which, as I have discussed previously, is knight f3, which is leading to the open variations where you quickly place the pawn at d4 after, say, for example, d6. Then d4, this leads to the open variations of the Sicilian. The main idea of playing d4 follows the principle of activating our pieces and, where possible, creating a threat. Now, White's threat is rather simple. Pawn takes pawn, and after pawn takes pawn, queen takes queen, and we head into a queenless middle game, wherein Black has lost his right to castle. So Black usually responds by playing pawn takes pawn. And then we see the second purpose of putting the knight at f3. We don't want to lose a tempo with our queen. And so White will usually capture knight takes d4. There are some sub-variations wherein White plays queen d4 and can also play a sort of delayed gambit with c3, which is sort of the Mora gambit delayed, I suppose. All right. So we'll deal with the open variation, and then we'll go on move 3. White can also play, on move 2. After c4, White can play closed systems, which I believe I've discussed as well, with knight c3 on move 2. Now, there are some sharp variations that can arise. There is on move 2 the possibility of d4, and after pawn takes pawn, c3, which is the Mora gambit delay with the knight, or the directly played Mora gambit. Knight is at f3 at g1, and white plays 2 d4. The idea being after pawn takes pawn, c3 is played, and black may play d3 if he doesn't know what he's doing. But most people who play the Sicilian have been prepped for the Mora gambit and will reply pawn takes pawn, to which you should not fool around with any strange sub-variations, but play directly knight c3. Knight takes c3. And the main idea here is to get a lead in development. So white gambits a pawn, but he gets a knight ahead out, and he has two on a semi-open file on the D line, has more space, e4, and he can possibly, quite possibly, bring a rook to c1, although that doesn't often feature in the Mora gambit. So white has knight f3, knight c3, d4, and the third variation that he can play on move 2 is c3. And this leads to the Alpin variation. These are the most common Sicilian defense replies to the Sicilian that white can play. Other ones are sub-variations that can often arise by transposition. So these are the main lines that you should consider, and the main lines that we will look at briefly. We'll start with knight f3. After knight f3, you can meet both d6, and the other possibility is, quite a common, is d6, or sorry, e6. And there's also a very powerful attempt for black in knight c6, which is the Sheleshnikov. At your level, the one you're most likely to encounter most often is d6. Okay, and after d6, you can play the open variation, which is characterized by d4, probably best by test. But I should mention here that there is the other possibility of bishop b5 check. It doesn't lead to terribly much for white, so if you're going to play the open variation, then better to lead with 3d4. After which you will meet cd4, and you can play the check over variation, which involves queen d4. And the purpose, the reason why you would play this is because you want to avoid the long strings of theory that come with knight d4. What the check over variation is aiming to do is it seems to violate the principle of bringing out the queen early. But what it does do is, by bringing the queen out early, black has essentially two responses that he could play for. He could play a6. The idea of a6 is to prevent bishop b5. Purpose of playing bishop b5 would be to pin a knight against the king. So a6 serves as a preventative measure to bishop b5, and black intends to play knight c6 on his next turn and gain a tempo against the queen. Also, a6 allows transpositions into positions that could come about in the knight. So a6 seems to be more useful for black than white. So white can proceed here after a6 with either c4, which aims at a Muroshi bind. What white says here is that since I can't stop black from playing knight c6 and hitting my queen, what I'll do is I'll make it harder for him to play the moves b5 and a future d5. I'll put my pawn on c4 and we'll have what's called a Muroshi bind set up. Okay. So if a6 comes, it would be possible to play c4. But what I would recommend is just simply continue to get your pieces out and get them out aggressively. And so the knight should probably go to c3. And after knight c6, the knight should go. I think you should probably play here. And after knight c6 hitting the queen, she should just move away to a safe central location. Perhaps queen e3, but this blocks the bishop but keeps the e-pawn doubly guarded and allows for a quick future castle after bishop d2, or possibly b3, bishop b2 and castle. But if you've gone to the trouble of opening this diagonal for your bishop, then it doesn't really make sense to confuse it by going like this, but this is a possible plan of development. Or after knight c6, you could retreat the queen directly to d1, giving the opening a center counter flavor. And you're saying that essentially you have your two knights out in good central control on the d file as compensation for having moved your queen twice. But continue with aggressive development for sure. Whoops, I don't want that to happen. So we'll go to d5 and move to d. There we go. All right, so you could play the check over variation, and after queen d4, if black doesn't play a6, then he's probably going to play knight c6. And should he do that, his idea, of course, is, straightforward, give me that queen. But he also wants to develop a tempo. But you use this time and you quickly bring this bishop out to b5. This makes way for you to castle short, preserves the queen's position in the center, and white's aim is a quick development with knight c3, bishop g5, and the rook to a central file. Those are the idea of the check over variation, quick development. Here, black may say to you, move your queen out of the way with e5. And after, say, queen d3, because now you can put the queen safely on after, for example, e5, you can safely put the queen on d3, since you have got your bishop out in front of the queen. And the queen being on d3 doesn't interfere with a possible future rook to d1. This is also going to be strategically double-edged, because unfortunately, the bishop on b5, while it does pin the knight, is usually used to fight for the d5 square in variations where white plays e5, or where black plays e5, like he may have done so here. For example, plays e5, saying, okay, get your queen out of the center, we'll move here, and then black continues to develop, maybe with, say, knight f6, aiming for bishop e7 and castle. Now, in situations where the pawn is at d6 and e5, this is usually, the square d5 is usually a weak square from black's point of view, or a weakened square from black's point of view. And so the bishop that's on b5 is usually a useful piece to attack along this line. So after bishop b5 and e5, what, and queen d3, for example, what white should be aware of is that after a6, um, white is, or black is asking for the bishop that could help in the fight for the d5 square. But that's okay, because you intend to take this and then possibly play c4 and make it quite difficult for black to play for d5. So the checkover variation avoids a lot of theory, although it does have its own body of theory, but it will give you your game an original flavor if you go for it. All right, so go back here, and after queen d4, the two principal lines are either a6 or knight c6. All right, let's go back to knight f3 on move 2. And black plays d6. And white isn't going to play bishop b5, check, which is a Moscow variation. He's not going to do that. He's going to simply play d4. And this leads to a series of very powerful or very tangled and complicated lines for both sides. Most of the time, you will see CD. And here you will take with the knight. And the purpose of playing d6 was to guard this square. And so now comes knight f6. Attacking the e-pawn. White tries can try several moves here. In the age of the computer, all moves are now playable, even 3h5. Against some variations of the English opening and some fianchetto systems, you will meet an early h5. Leela has said that h5 is playable, or harry the h-pawn attacks, or rook pawn attacks are quite playable. All right. However, after knight f6, you should probably develop a knight, and that means knight c3. Now, it's possible here to play bishop d3, but there is a weakness of there being an unprotected knight at d4, and also the blocking of the d file. And so you might have a quick e5 to boot the knight out of the center, and then a quick entrance of the knights into the center. So by playing knight c3, as opposed to bishop d3, what you do is you can take greater control of the d5 square, and you develop a piece enhancing your possibilities for castling queenside. Play could go as follows. So knight c3, and we get the useful a6. This is more useful for black than hindrance, because it stops 3 pieces from coming to the b5 square, and it supports black's potential minority attack with b5 and b4. You should, as white, not underestimate the potential of this, and just be aware that it is a latent threat in this position. It is sort of a delayed attack on the e-pawn. However, black has to be wary of playing b5 too soon, because obviously you give up control of the c6 square. Now, this is the Najdorf variation, and what it aims at is restricting the movement of white's knights and bishop towards the black position. Black intends to attack the center and adopt a delayed double king pawn formation by playing for e5. And that's specifically playing e5 For example, after, say, what should white do here? Anyone? Well, he can play bishop c4, which is the Sozin Najdorf. He can play bishop e2, which is Geller's move. F.M. Geller was a great proponent of playing bishop e2. Karpov also used this. He is the 12th world champion after Bobby Fischer. He used to play bishop e2 quite a bit, particularly in his matches against Lev Polygaevsky. Bishop e2 was often played. The idea of bishop e2 is A, not to expose the bishop so much on c4, and also to gain control of the g4 square and support possible quick attacks with g4, but also to aid the bishop on e3 in its development. So the bishop could go to e2 to support g4, like I said, could go to c4 to put pressure on the d5 square and upon this diagonal here. And it aids the bishop coming to e3 because on e2 it prevents the knight from coming to g4 when the bishop comes to e3. So we have the Sozin that you can play, the calm classical bishop e2, or the very sharp moves involving a quick g4. Now, popular today is a move that after a6, Bobby Fischer said he would like to play, and that is h3. This serves the same purpose as would bishop placing the bishop on e2, but it keeps in hand white's placement of his king. He keeps reserved where he's going to put the bishop. He aims for a g4 in the future, and he prepares for the bishop to come to e3. Also, the move h3 can be seen as a useful move, since it is a move that creates luft for the black king, or air for the white king, I'm sorry, should white castle kingside. So of course, h3 has a lot smaller body of theory developed around it, and so anybody who does any exploration along these lines by checking the various databases that are here. Whoops. Simply go here. And you can see what's going on as regards to various moves. So h3, as you can see, right down here, I'll just enlarge my screen a little bit. So h3 is way down here. See, way down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's, in this database, there's 5,800 games. It's quite drawish, as you can see by the stats, 29 to 21, and quite a large body of draws. Okay. F3 is also a possibility. 31, 22, and 47% draws. So you might look at these and say, you know, that's pretty good. Yes, if I have a high drawing percentage as white, but I win 8% more than black does in these lines, and 9% more in this. So this is where you might look to do some opening preparation if you're not interested in following along the main lines of theory. But that's up to you. But you should know some of the ideas behind these things. And you should try them out in some training games in order to get a feel for different kinds of positions. All right, I'll close the book here. Now, the reason I'm mentioning these sort of offbeat sidelines, so to speak, is because you guys are, you know, between 9, 8, and 15. And so school gets in the way. as you get older, more life will become more complicated. And so if you still want to play chess and have fun at it, it might be useful to pick a good sideline that you find playable, that you like, and do some research there as a way of economizing on the time you spend studying the opening. There are many facets of the game that you should be aware of. You know, how to plan, how to calculate, how to judge positions, um, how to analyze your games. These are all aspects of the game that you need practicing. So picking one or two openings, d4, d4, picking a good playable sideline will allow you time to work on other things that are important to um, your enjoyment of the game. Okay, so we're here. We've talked about bishop going to e2, pawn to h3, pawn to f3, bishop going to c4. We are in the main line or the main branch of the Nador. And here I would probably think you should play bishop to e2. If you're aggressive, bishop c4. And what you're aiming for with bishop c4, is to put pressure on the f7 square and particularly the d5 square. Here, after bishop c4, there's several possibilities. Knight d2 is one, or knight d7 is one. The idea being here to send the knight to c5 and put pressure on the e4 pawn. Another possible line here is e5. Idea being here to drive the knight out of the center, and after bishop e7, black will be aiming to play bishop e6 and a quick d5 where possible. And this is one of the most important strategic battles that can go on here. And after e5, this is called the Boleslavsky variation of the Najdorf. So what he's essentially saying is that I can control the d5 square enough times. I'm not necessarily going to be able to play d5, but you're not going to be able to safely put a piece there. Play bishop e7. Now, right here is an important juncture. You can play the prophylactic h6. A prophylactic move is a move that prevents the active operations of your opponent. So bishop g5 is strategically desirable from white's point of view. By strategy, I mean, or strategical, I mean, what should white be doing? Or what should a person be doing? When you ask a strategical question, what you are asking is a question about what you should be doing. So what white has got here is a weakened d5 square to work with. He's got 4 people looking at it. Pawn, 2 minor pieces, and the queen. So if he can safely establish a piece on that square, and after an exchange a new piece can replace it, then he's going to have a centralized and very powerful outpost piece. So strategically, white wants to remove a defender of that square. And so white wants to play bishop g5. So what black does is he says, well, there are no pawn levers right now that are easily exercised. This pawn lever has got too much preparation to be effective. And this pawn lever, white would like more preparation before he aims at playing this. Because each pawn move does come with its drawback. So black says, you know what, there's no pawn levers that are going to really hurt me except f4, and I can deal with that. So I'm going to take out some time to make a strategically desirable move, which is h6. And what h6 does is it prevents the development of the bishop to g5. And thus, it enables black to fight more easily for the d5 square. Now, nowadays we would, in the old days, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they would look at a6 as, or h6 as too time wasting. You're supposed to get your pieces out and fight for control of the center. But by using h6 and a6 here, what black says is I'm preparing my house, which is this stuff that he owns here. He's saying I'm preparing to fight for the d5 square by preventing you from pinning my knight. So after bishop c4, e5, knight b3, knight b3 might not be the best placement for this piece, because after b5, gaining another tempo, if the bishop wants to stay out here, it can't do so because this knight is here. And if it goes to the d5 square, it attacks along this diagonal, but black is possibly interested in dealing with the threat to his rook by removing this powerful bishop from the board. And yes, after, for example, b5, bishop d5, now there's an attack on the rook. Knight takes d5, and queen takes d5, and say rook a7. What white is saying is I have 3 pieces out. I'm going to gain a tempo against your rook, which will probably run away to d7. And since the knight is way back here, as opposed to being on d4, he doesn't have to worry about coming to c6 so quickly. And what black is going to do is he's going to put his bishop on b7 and gain his tempo back. And so we have a vigorous strategic battle going on for control of the d5 square. So white has managed to trade off one potential controller of the d5 square, and he's got one of the defenders of the d5 square. But we can see here that after, say, queen d5 and rook d7, let's see, queen d5, rook a7, say bishop b3, rook d7, that white can't make much further progress with his queen, trying to invade the black position. All the vulnerable points are guarded. And so black is going to gain a tempo back with bishop b7 and drive the queen out of the center. What's going to happen here is white's going to have a position where he has good control in the d file. He can establish a knight on the d5 square and possibly a queen or a rook in the future. But black has the possibility of getting quick development and possibly being able to play the d5 break fairly quickly. The knights would like to approach, but again, find it difficult to gain purchase for their hooves. In any case, this is what could happen if the knight goes to b3 and black is overzealous by playing, or seemingly overzealous by playing a quick b5. Okay, so we've gone to the Najdorf. We've discussed a couple of ideas with bishop c4. Black will usually reply at e5, and he can get into the Boleslavsky variation of the Najdorf. What you also could do is play bishop c4, and black takes a more restrained approach to the center by playing for what is called a Scheveningen setup with e6. Black fights for the d5 square control. Black fights for the d5 square control directly. He places the pawn on e6, and he blocks the diagonal for the bishop, and the pawn at e6 supports a potential d5. With this, though, he says, I'm going to play a b5 move and a b4 move and attack this pawn on e4. So he's going to use the placement of the bishop when he plays e6 as a means of gaining a couple of tempi to advance his queenside ambition. What is nice about the Sicilian defense in general is its strategic complexity. And this is why, as a chess player, you should try and bring the Sicilian in to your repertoire as a means of enhancing your chances to encounter different kinds of pawn structures and plans. So e6 is a more, I suppose you could say, principled approach to the center. With e6, black says, I don't want to give any concessions, and I want to go with what I gained is 2 pawns in the center and the long-term prospects it gives me. It keeps your pieces out of the center, and it makes it possible for my pieces to later enter into the center. Okay, so we've talked about bishop c4, and we've talked about h3, f3, and the other placement of the bishop here is e2. This is Karpov's move. Well, Geller-Karpov, I suppose. And the idea is a rather simple one, is white goes for classical development. Black will, could again play e5. And after knight b3, there are no tempos to be gained quickly with b5 and b4. And with this, if black plays b5, what the idea is to quickly attack on the pawn, but white is going to play bishop e3, and if b4, say, haha, I gain pawn, black is going to be rudely met with knight d5 and find that he can't easily capture said e-pawn, largely because we see the drawback of a6 and a quick b5 and b4 is the weakening of all of these squares on the queen side. And so white says, I dare you to take this e-pawn, after which I'll play here. It's fairly obvious. Gain control of the dark squares, hit the queen, supported by this knight, and then go and win the exchange. And possibly that might be a rook, should the knight be able to escape. I'll deprive you of your castling rights. I'll really mess you up. So bishop e2 says, go ahead and play your quick b5, b4, and I'll use my lead in development to use a blitzkrieg attack against your queen side. So black should be aware of this latent potential in the position and be more conservative in what he's going to do. And what that will usually be is after bishop e2, he won't be quickly playing b5 and b4, but he'll be completing his development and delaying this weakening of his queenside square. So possibly would meet bishop e2. He'll play bishop e3, He'll castle. He'll castle. He'll play maybe knight d7. The idea being to stick this knight on c5 and put pressure on the e4 pawn and combine that possibly with b5. And then you will play f4. And then the battle will be on for who can gain an advantage with either f5 or can black put sufficient pressure on the center before white can get something going on the king side. This is a very interesting strategic formation for both sides, complex, and can lead to some quite interesting games. All right, so this is perhaps a tabia or a position that you could go for. Tabia is a basic starting position. Okay, from which you conduct your middle game. All right, so knight f3 and d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, and knight c3, and a6 is the knight variation, after which bishop c4 and bishop e2 can be played. And the other variation that you will encounter is the dreaded fianchetto variation called the dragon. The dragon is very sharp. The idea is obviously to fianchetto the king's bishop. This provides adequate or added protection to the king along the diagonal from c2 to h7. But of course, it sticks this g pawn out and makes a hook for Harry, the h pawn, to hurry down the board and try and pry open the king. This h pawn attack is very dangerous against a fianchetto system. Bobby Fischer said h4, h5, sack, sack, and mate. That's what he said that you do to the dragon. And of course, there's a famous game played by Bobby Fischer against Bent Larsen that serves as a model example of using the h pawn to pry open the king side, take off the dark-bound bishop, and then invade on the dark squares. However, if white is not successful in breaching black's king's defenses, then there's often a very powerful counterattack with the bishop on this long diagonal. And the interesting thing about the dragon is it features opposite side castling, which can be very exciting. However, this is one of the areas that you should not go into as white unless you've looked at the opening book. You should visit a few websites and find out how to play certain orders of moves and why the moves are played, and go from there. However, that means watching a lot of video, and you guys would rather play chess, and as you get older, homework and other activities are going to get in the way. Remember, chess is a pastime that you should enjoy, but you do have to do some preparation. So, as white, what you will see after you have white, you see g6. What you should do is you should get your bishop out there and get ready to castle. And get ready to castle long. The castle short variations of the dragon are thought not to be as orners to play, but that they have their own venom as well. White aims to use his space advantage and lead in development in order to gain an advantage there. So bishop e3 aims to castle long, and you should be aware right here after bishop e3 that this move is not going, should not happen. This move is weak. Some would say blunder, what have, because of the fact that after bishop b5, check, black is forced to lose a pawn to start, and further, and it's just horrible. This is awful. Knight g4 is a blunder, and you should just play bishop b5. That's why after bishop e3, let's just look at this and see why it's a blunder. Here, okay. First of all, this move is violating the principle of moving the same piece twice, and its aim is getting after a bishop. And after bishop b5,
check,
since black can't move his king, he has to interpose, either here or here. And should the interposition come on d7, then the g4 knight is lost. The queen simply captures this knight. And should the interposition take place on c6, then simply knight c6. Simply knight c6 leads to
check,
a horrible position as well. You get to lose the rook over in the corner, and this is just awful. So that's why knight g4 is blunder. So what will happen is after bishop e3, black will play bishop g7. This provides the ability of the king to move over. Now, if there's a bishop b5
check,
I can interpose this, and I'm not hanging the knight at g4. So after bishop e3, no knight g4. Let me get rid of that piece of crap. Don't want that thing in there. So you'll meet bishop e3, bishop g7. We'll get rid of this. And now white has, now black is threatening to play this move, although really going after said bishop is not, not really what black is about here. But white will prevent it and will play either h3 or bishop e2, or most likely the Yugoslav variation with f3. What this does is it strengthens the pawn chain along this line. It's going to kill any action. If a bishop is placed on this line and this knight is unhappy about the fact that this pawn is very strong at e4. So after f3, no castle, you may meet this. And now you can play queen d2. And black should set about challenging the center with knight c6. What knight c6 does is, by putting pressure on the d4 square, it prevents this guy from running away. He still has to play watch on the center. So after knight c6, we are at move 8, and white can play 9 castles. And this is the super sharp line. The other line, the other main line, or other important line, is 9 bishop c4. Bishop c4 aims to place the bishop at b3, control the d5 square, but also give more protection to his king with having an extra piece on the king side. However, in the dragon, we've been finding out lately that tempi are very important. And so what you can encounter here is after 9 castle, what white is aiming for here is to save 2 tempi. He doesn't want his bishop to go beyond c4, hit by a knight, have to go here. So what he aims to do is he aims to get his kingside attack going a little bit more quickly with leaving the bishop at c1. From c1, the bishop guards the c4 square. The knight wants to go here and fork these 2 pieces here and get the dark bound bishop with the queen's knight as opposed to the king's knight. However, white says, well, the bishop at f1 can guard the c4 square just as easily from f1 as b3. So that means I gain time to get my attack going with a quick g4 and h4. However, against 9 castles, what black should do is he should gambit a pawn and not do this knight e5 stuff, but he should consider playing d5. Now, what black is saying here is I want to fight for the center. My immediate idea is to take this person on e4, although there's a trick here, because if you do play d5 and then de4, then this move here is going to be thrown in as an intermezzo. For example, d5, king b1, pawn takes pawn. He's going to give you this move first. And he's going to attack the queen. Twice. Or 3 times. So when you do this, you get to lose your queen or you get to lose a rook. And so you play queen takes queen, and now you see the trick of moving the king to b1. There's no check. And so the knight is going to go here,
check,
and all of a sudden it's black who's in a bad way. Because the knight took a knight on c6 and a pawn on e7, then he's going to be able to recover his queen. Pretty sickening situation. So black wants to play de4, but he has to prepare that. But what he is doing is he wants to also gain tempi by playing e5. And he also wants white to open the b file so that the rook and the bishop can coordinate on the b2 square. So he offers a pawn, and white at this juncture can play pawn takes pawn, but that would be falling into what black wants to do. Could play this, or after d5, not king b1, but maybe knight takes knight. Then pawn takes knight. And this is the gambit. Sorry. Tournament in 10 minutes. Thank you, Jeffrey. I'll go a little bit faster here. And I guess we'll cover some more of this material next week. So takes and take. What's going on here? Well, black says, you know what? Go ahead and win your pawn. And we have this very sharp gambit. Black gambited a pawn. White took the material. He's one of the 5 basic things you can do. Material, piece placement, pawn structure, king safety, and threats. Those are the ways you judge your position. So black says, or white says, you know what? Thanks for the pawn. I can neutralize your attack. Now, at this point, black should not go and play queen takes queen. That's not the way to get some initiative. You keep the queens on the board and use these open lines. against the exposed white king. You play queen c7. And what you're aiming to do here is have a powerful attack by bishop f5 and hit this guy. So if queen gobbles this, you do this, and
check,
white has, or black has, sufficient initiative to compensate for the material deficit. It's 2 rooks for a queen, 2 bishops here versus 2 bishops here, 2 rooks against this girl here. But what black is saying is that my initiative against the king is worth more than your 2 rooks and the potential of the 2 rooks. This is a double-edged position, and you can search for, you can go to chessgames.com and search for this position. For example, if you don't use ChessBase or chess.com, you can find this situation here. And this is a double-edged position that can be fun for both sides. White says, you know what, my material over the long term is going to be superior to the queen and the initiative that she can gain. The queen likes picking up weak pawns, and there are going to be several of them. And she will use her ability to fork unprotected pieces in order to gather up a few pawns and harry the enemy king. So if you play the 9 castles variation, there is a possibility that you will meet d5, because anybody who plays the dragon will be prepared for the long and short castle games that white can go for. So playing d4, you will encounter either the mainline knight or mainline dragon. If we go back here, after d4, cd4, knight d4, and knight f6, you have a wide variety of choice here. And after knight c3, you might meet a6 or g6, and also the classical variation with knight c6. Here, black doesn't want to make any concessions whatsoever. He says, okay, I'll match you man for man. My only disadvantage is in space. I have a pawn at d6 versus a pawn at e4. But I have I have an extra center pawn, which I can choose how I'm going to place him and control the development of events in the center. So a very double-edged course of action. After knight c6, it's usually good to leave your knight there and keep the tension. Don't be doing knight takes knight. You could consider playing bishop b5 and putting pressure along this diagonal. But you should remember, guys, if you bring your pieces out and you exchange them off, you know, bring out a knight and then take it off, bring out a bishop and take somebody else off, you can't develop a particular game if you keep exchanging willy-nilly. That's why it's important to keep the tension. So exchanging one pair of pieces is a good idea, perhaps. Knight takes knight. I wouldn't play knight takes knight as white in this position, because it helps block more than it does white. I would just, you know, continue my development with perhaps bishop e2, h3, f3. These are all sharp variations that can cause the unprepared black player a lot of problems. So you'll encounter a third move, knight c6, on move 5. And the other move that you can encounter is e6, which is the Scheveningen variation. And the reason I'm spending so much time on these opening moves is because they have the possibility of transposing of being very chameleon-like in their characteristics, and they can transpose into one situation or the other. So I'm going to stop here. Hopefully all of you have registered for the tournament, and I'm going to wish you good luck in the tournament, and I'll end my screen share now and let those of you who have not entered the tournament enter the tournament. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for hanging out. Sean, I'm participating in the casino, so I'm going to have to go and get some sleep. I'm spending the time in the count room tonight, so I'm going to leave off now.